Hi, I'm Joshua Taylor with the Conservative Party of Canada. I'm from Geraldton, Ontario, where I spent almost the entirety of my life. One of the main reasons I decided to run this year is because I felt like rural areas had been traditionally incredibly underrepresented. Typically, politicians would come and visit the rural areas only when it was a matter of political convenience, when there was an election coming up or something like that, and it made us feel really disenfranchised. And I want to run to be that voice for people in the north, in the rural communities, Thunder Bay, of course, with policies that are going to benefit the entirety of Thunder Bay Superior North and not just Thunder Bay. So in 2011, I began my education at the University of Western Ontario. I did my undergrad in criminology, and I completed my master's 1 year later in kinesiology. During my leap year, I was actually accepted into law school, but I decided against it at the last minute because I felt like it wasn't really the right path for me. Generally, I just wanted to go to Western to see what the rest of Ontario had to offer. I didn't want to be that person who always lived in a small town and never really had context outside of it. And I think leaving actually made me love the area a lot more because it let me really understand the sense of community that we have in the small rural areas. After I finished university, I went back to Geraldton and I worked as an employment counselor for a year with Indigenous youth, and that was at the Thunderbird Friendship Center. And so part of that basically involved really ensuring that Indigenous youth had the opportunity to access employment throughout the Greenstone area, and also really liaising with a lot of other Indigenous groups to ensure that the best opportunities could be accessed by the entirety of these demographics here. Basically, because my employment in Thunder Bay directly started essentially as the COVID pandemic began, and what you could see is just kind of a societal breakdown. Really, you could see an increased level of domestic violence, people becoming suspicious of one another, calling the cops on people they thought were breaking public health unit guidelines, and it made me look at society like a little bit more cynically. I didn't like that, and I know that there's a way back from that with a little bit more law and order and just a little bit more of a pragmatic approach to the way we look at our communities. I do really think that I can appeal to a pretty large base. I mean, I'm principled enough that I think I appeal to traditional conservatives, right? And I think that's something that cuts across age, definitely, right? It's like someone with principles at 20 is the same person with the same principles at 60. They just happen to have more experience. And so I think that if someone is a really principled conservative, I don't really have to worry about them changing their mind because of who I am, as long as my principles and my ideas and everything really align with what theirs are. So I'm not worried about that. So I think that cuts across demographics generally. In terms of youth, I have heard, and I'm not exactly sure how true this is, that this generation is actually going to be the most conservative in a lot of ways, because I feel like at the base of conservatism is, of course, I want to conserve, right? And so as we get more and more progressive, there's only so much further we can progress before we want things to just like put the brakes on a little bit, slow down and make incremental changes to the way society is, instead of overhauling it every time there's a problem. Basically, cancel culture is kind of a microcosm of the way we should look at society and history. I think basically if we look at the things that we've done that are wrong, we always look at that history basically through the lens of today, which is just such a unfortunate way of looking at it. Like, people act like they're so much more morally superior than people in the 1800s or people in the 1700s. And I mean, you can't tell me if you were like, if most people were born in like centuries ago, they probably would have made so many of the same choices that people then did, because morality is always evolving and standards and like ethics are evolving, right? Like, it's not like it's been static throughout history. Like, we're learning. I mean, we're not infallible. Like, we're moving forward. And so I think to condemn people for things that they've done historically, I mean, especially because so many of the same parties that are like proponents of cancel culture are the same ones who are advocating for a rehabilitative approach to justice. So how do you how do you balance one with the other, right? And that's what really irks me, is that kind of incongruency that you see between those two approaches, to one because it's a legal issue and the other because it's a social issue. Because yeah, sure, you can get away with things in the court of a public opinion that you couldn't in a legal court. That doesn't make either one, morally correct. And so I mean, things like that really bother me about cancel culture. I think people generally should be able to say what they want, as much as it's unfortunate that people do make those choices, and then we can make our own judgments going forward about that, right? It's, someone could say something bad to me, and I will not say, I will not associate with that person going forward, right? And that's the way I react to something that they've done. But if I met this person and like I knew everything about him, and then I found out something about his past before, that doesn't change the person he was in between that time, right? So yeah, I think we should look at ways of going forward instead of constantly trying to dig up things that have been done historically. But of course, I mean, that doesn't erase the past, right? Of course, like with Indigenous people, so much of their present is connected with their history, right? I mean, with like intergenerational trauma. I mean, there's like tangible effects, right? I mean, in terms of parenting and parental skills, when you're separated from your parents, like how can you ever really be expected to understand how to raise a family if you were never in a properly functioning family? And that, I mean, that's an issue we have to really find a way to address. I don't think any government has adequately addressed the issues that have faced Indigenous people, and I don't think that anyone has a monopoly over Indigenous people generally. I mean, I think in terms of housing, one of the key issues is obviously like supply and demand. I mean, and that's ultimately what drives up the cost, right? Is if you only have a certain, like a finite amount of houses available, and then there's like an anticipated economic boom in an area, though the price is going to go up, right? Because everyone wants to get access to those houses first. But if you had an ample supply of houses, like more construction, and which would probably come from less red tape on housing regulation and everything like that, then you wouldn't have to worry about the cost being so high, because people would actually be willing to let their houses go for a lower price. I mean, I think it's easy to say in bigger metropolitan areas, of course, right, where you can easily construct housing because there's always people wanting to move there. But in a smaller area like this, it's like you really have to be sure that there's going to be an economic boom, or you just built a house and then you're out however much, right? I mean, I think we obviously, I mean, like in terms of basic like financial literacy is a huge thing just generally, right? Like people should be able to understand how to manage their own finances, to actually really, and start from maybe when they get out of high school or college or university, and really figure out how to budget their finances and maybe put a little bit away towards saving for a house. And also, people really should not be ashamed of living with their parents for however long. I mean, it's like I think that if you're willing to maybe rent from your parents at like a discounted price or whatever, I mean, so you're not relying on the generosity of your parents or something, but you're saving up money, and then you actually have that money to be independent. It's like, would you rather have that, or would you rather have your pride where you're throwing away cash to rent for the rest of your life, right? So I mean, I'd sooner suck it up and live with, like, I mean, I don't live with my parents now, but I I went back home for like about a year when I was working at the Friendship Center, just because I was trying to save up, and I was finishing my master's and everything by distance at the same time. And so it made sense. It made like economic sense. And I think people need to make decisions that, I mean, they need to live within their means first, right? Like people who are making $50,000 a year should not be going out trying to buy like a $1 million house. And I think that's one thing, right? It's like, so my question is, do people have a dream of living in a house, or do people have a dream of living in the perfect house? You can establish yourself, keep making smart economic decisions to move ahead, and then you really, I mean, you'll gain momentum. Most people move through a number of income
cycle or income.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and yeah, brackets throughout their life. And so of course, like, you can be expected that you're going to be better, like on average at 30 than you were at like 20, and 40 than you were at 30. So if you continue to maintain like smart economic principles in your own like fiscal management, then yeah, I mean I think you're going to be able to afford a home as long as we continue to address like supply and demand and also like really red tape. I mean we can't have these long restrictions, but I don't think subsidizing like housing to a massive extent is really the solution to that, because when we basically take taxpayers' money and just the bottom line of everything goes up, like the bottom line of commodities and everything goes up, and that's my main issue with so much of like all these like really generous social programs. Like money doesn't come out of nowhere. Our national debt right now is 1.12 trillion or something right now. Our net national debt, that is. And so the idea that this will just magically disappear without upping the price of like commodities or anything is, I mean, ridiculous basically. So if you make sure that we're appropriately addressing supply and demand and not just arbitrarily constructing houses in places that they're not going to be lived in. Also, I mean, another way of addressing supply and demand, which the conservatives are going to do, is to put a temporary freeze on foreign buyers of housing, right? Which is a huge thing. I mean, people who don't live in the country owning it just so they can like watch the prices rise is, I mean, is just wrong. Overall, I don't really think that we can force pharmacare to come in the way that it's proposed right now. I don't really know exactly what like a pharmacare would look like, but I know that it's like we should focus on the people who have the things like the conditions that are absolutely not affected by their lifestyle at all, right? Like people who have cancer, or yeah, or like cancer and is like a huge one, right? I mean, I know so many people that have like in my own life that have like passed away from cancer, right? And it's not like a melanoma or like a lung cancer or something, right? It's like a cancer that just happened through like not through circumstance, just by like happenstance, really. And yeah, I mean, we should definitely make sure that those people, I think, in my opinion, are prioritized. Everyone deserves the right to like to access healthcare, of course. But I think like some people are like higher priority in the way that their conditions arise, and like I'm always going to feel like a lot more sorry like for the person who has like a cancer that like a brain cancer that came out of nowhere than the person who over and over and over went in like a tanning bed and got melanoma. And I think that's like maybe some people can consider that to be like cruel. I don't necessarily think so.
You're talking about people taking responsibility for
Yeah,
their actions.
basically generally, yeah, it's all about responsibility for your actions. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think healthcare. I mean, we just have to have a more compassionate approach generally. I mean, as much as we can, we need to have a compassionate but also pragmatic approach to healthcare generally.